What's up, guys? Welcome to Sebastian Uncensored. This is a channel where I talk about pretty much anything that's on my mind, ranging from business topics to dating and relationships and travel and health, philosophy, everything that is me and that I don't necessarily share with, anyone, that I don't make that publicly available anymore. Of course, you're here because maybe you think that my takes are accurate, or you just kind of like my sense of humor. It's all well and good. I really just want to share things that I'm learning, things that I feel can better other people's lives. And in a lot of ways, I'm just speaking to myself from the past, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when I was in my early 20s, living in China. I'll give you a quick breakdown on actually who I am and things I've actually accomplished in my life, which I feel are kind of out of the ordinary. So let's start here. I was born and raised in Canada. I tend to say Vancouver, but actually it's a city called Surrey, about a 45-minute drive outside of Vancouver. But people don't know where Surrey is, so I just say Vancouver. In any case, it was a fairly boring but safe upbringing, nothing out of the ordinary, no broken bones, no major family traumas, parents married together. Both my parents are actually immigrants. That's something that a lot of people never really pick up on. But even though they've acclimated to Canada, they are both from different countries, from Europe and Latin America, respectively. And so I feel like growing up, I had a very different perspective on things. And even though, by all accounts and purposes, I'm white, I wasn't quite white in the way that your average Canadian was. The guys who just spoke English, were never exposed to a different culture, maybe a grandparent from the United Kingdom or Ireland or something, still a very Anglo kind of upbringing and philosophy, which is what Canada is built on. So fair enough. In any case, from a young age, I knew that I didn't quite fit in. I knew that things were not as they seemed, that people acted quite differently than how you would have expected them to, than how the movies portrayed them. It was almost like people were living out some kind of alternate reality. And as I grew older, as I met all sorts of different people and went through different experiences, especially when I started living in different countries like China, my eyes were opened in a way where they could never be shut again. What's seen cannot be unseen. I went to university when I was 18 there in Canada. I didn't have a major picked out, and in fact, I was very apprehensive about the idea of going to higher education. Even though I was not lazy, I was not averse to studying and learning. In fact, I've always liked it. I've always liked to read. I've been kind of an introvert for the most part. I've trained myself to be more expressive and communicative, and I work in sales now, so I have to communicate with people to an extent. I did a year at university in Canada, and it was okay, but something happened that completely changed the trajectory of my life. I took Chinese classes, Mandarin Chinese, in both semesters, and the teachers definitely recognized that I had not only a genuine passion for learning this language, but I was good at it. I was top of my class. I did better in Chinese than I did in any other classes. And I was not the worst student, but nor was I a total bookworm. I wanted to go out, I wanted to party, I wanted to explore. Through my scholastic achievement, I was recognized and given the opportunity to go to China for a year, all expenses paid, not really. Tuition, room and board, and a small monthly stipend was provided, which is great. All I had to do was pay for airfare and whatever else extra I would need while I'm there, or if I wanted to get accommodation off campus. I took it. I jumped at the opportunity. I was like, get me out of here. Because it was finally an opportunity to completely reinvent myself and go to a big city and live there halfway affordably, because the thought of moving to Vancouver or anywhere big in Canada was just completely daunting to me, since things always seemed so expensive. It always seemed like kind of a ripoff. When I got to China, I saw that some things were significantly cheaper, and I saw a completely different side of the world. Long story short, I was not meaning to get too carried away. In fact, I'll just make an individual video about this. The idea is, I stayed in China for a total of 4 years. I was awarded 2 scholarships, one that I already mentioned, and the second one was a Chinese government scholarship, which you should definitely look up because it gave me more than the previous one. It gave me more of a monthly stipend in addition to accommodation plus a full degree's worth of tuition. I could have chosen any degree, and I chose to go and attend the 3rd highest ranked university in the country, which is called Fudan in Shanghai. And that was real impressive to a lot of Chinese when I would tell them that. But what they didn't know was I never went to classes after about the 3rd or 4th day. I just thought, no, this isn't going to be for me. And I don't regret it. There wasn't too much to learn in class. I was always soaking up real-world knowledge and experience. While I was there, I was teaching English, and I discovered that there's a booming market for Western people, Western-looking people who have Western passports, and especially if you're a native English speaker, to go and teach children, teenagers, adults, all sorts of English language services. And it was booming. I was brought in, and I started to work for a friend of mine who was working in a bilingual school. So he had access to affluent clients, like very, very affluent. We're talking some pretty wealthy Chinese people who just blew my mind in terms of what was possible. And so that was great. That was a real eye-opener. And then afterwards, I started to get my own clients, which was okay, but it reached a certain point where I was getting exhausted. And I just, looking back now, I was simply too afraid. I was lacking confidence in my business skills. I didn't really have business skills anyways. And it ended up being that I went back to Canada, which was necessary. And I'm glad I did, because I went back just about a year before the, what am I going to call it? The beer bug hit everyone. And so that was shit. That was not an easy time in my life. But thankfully in 2020, the summer of 2020, I started an exterior cleaning business as per guidance from an online course that I bought. And it was the first business I ever did. Like, I would call that a legit business. Not compared to English teaching, this was a real business, and it was making me a lot more money. That was ever successful. And I was making money hand over fist. I was going out doing all sorts of jobs that involved pressure washing and cleaning windows, rain gutters, people's roofs, all sorts of stuff. They would pay me a good chunk of money. Some days I would be driving home with $1,000 in cash, Canadian, but still, it was mind-blowing. And to go from feeling like I had no value and totally depressed, having just a very low opinion of myself and self-worth, it was addictive. But then I decided, this is great, but I hate being here. I hate being back in Vancouver, this city, and dare I say even this country in this day and age has a dark cloud hanging over it. And I was absolutely correct. Now, fast forward in 2026, having seen so much of the deterioration that has occurred in Canada, not just in Canada, but in many other countries around the world. And so I took a leap of faith with what few savings I had from cleaning houses all summer, and I got on a one-way flight to Cancun, Mexico. Now, it's a little bit easier for me to talk about this next chapter in my life because I'm also a Mexican citizen because of family ties. That made it a million times easier to just walk in and adjust, plug myself in, get a bank account, get a voter ID card, get a residency, all this stuff.